Right, starting recording. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Redfield Fiction Factory. My guest today comes from the United States. His name is JL Mackey. I don't know much about him other than his avatar on Twitter is of the logician and mathematician Kurt Gödel, and we'll come to that hopefully. And he goes by the username of Based Fyodor. Also, I happen to know from reading his Twitters that he plays the piano and reads Augustine. Hi, JL, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Great here, thanks. It's another lovely hot day in Yucatan. We're waiting for it to get cooler. It's promising to do so, but hasn't quite happened yet. You're in the United States. Do you care to tell us more about which part, or you're keeping that secret?
I currently live in Alabama.
Okay, so the Deep South, very interesting. This is the part where I say, where are you from, your background originally? Introduce yourself and tell us a bit, as much as you like, about your life to date.
I've lived most of my life in the Deep South, if you can include Florida in that, which obviously there's a lot of contention about whether or not Florida is actually Southern. Certain parts of it definitely are. But I was born and spent the first quarter of my life in rural Florida. And then I moved to North Florida and then joined the military, did some traveling a bit, lived on a few other states due to that. And then I got out of the military, came to Alabama for education and my wife's education. And we've basically been here ever since. And I really enjoy it. I like Alabama a lot.
It figures that you're from the Deep South because the novelette we're going to discuss, called The Fall, is set there. Well, I think it's in Florida, isn't it? But same principle. Bet you're glad you're not in Florida at the moment. The headlines are full at the moment. It's being hammered hard right at this second by Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends and family in Florida, especially South Florida. So it's concerning. Yeah, hopefully it won't hit them too badly, but I guess that remains to be seen.
And so you're out of the army, you're settled, you're married, you're in Alabama, you have a full-time job, I presume. You don't have to say what it is, but give us some sort of concept of your lifestyle there.
Yeah, well, I was in the Marine Corps, but
okay.
I guess to civilians, it's all the same. But we like to make that distinction, just ego, I guess.
Don't worry,
yeah.
I'm a great appreciator of the distinction. I'm sorry, I didn't realize, but congratulations. So that's quite something. Go on.
That's totally fine. I'm just being a little ridiculous. Yeah, I do work full time, and most of which is spent traveling, for better or worse. So I guess we can talk about it a little later if you like, but like my writing schedule is absolutely erratic. Has no regularity whatsoever. So yeah, I spend most of my time away from home, away from the wife and the dogs and whatnot, but I get to do a lot of traveling, Texas to Pennsylvania to Indiana, everywhere in between, which is interesting in its own right.
Yes, an erratic writing schedule, that no one recommends it, but I find they all say that you should have a nice regular routine to create the best. But in my experience, it's not all bad having an erratic schedule. It somehow takes your mind, your focus off the work sufficiently that you can actually be more creative rather than being totally bogged down within it. So it's not a comfortable way to write, but it does produce good results, I found. And so where in this journey did you become red-pilled then, JL? The Marine Corps obviously, or didn't used to take in many snowflakes. I think now it's becoming compulsory that you wear high heels at the very least before you sign up. But you were in the pre-woke military, I'm presuming, more or less. Were you red pill way before this, or was it something that just you picked up along the way?
It's been a slow progression over probably the last 2 years maybe, 2.5 years. I grew up like small c conservative, or like kind of considering myself libertarian, that kind of lane. And the military, I don't know, I wouldn't say accentuated that, but it gave me a pretty notable distaste for like bureaucracy and all of the BS that comes with it, and the politics and the military industrial complex, which I'm not a fan of anymore. But I guess that's probably in the same boat as a lot of people, which were like considered themselves conservative or like right of center or whatever, until COVID came around and all kinds of other stuff that seemed to make it more and more apparent that there was no one at the wheel, and the car was going 150 miles an hour.
And there was a cliff ahead. Yeah.
Yes.
So you're the classic story in a way. Circumstances, events, the environment around you changed, and you changed. You were bright enough and alert enough and non-compliant enough to change with it, and it's always encouraging to hear these stories, because really that's our only way we're going to save ourselves, is if enough people follow that track. The COVID, it was the lockdowns, it was all the nonsense, and we've got to be careful. My last video was cancelled by YouTube, so we'll just leave that part of it alone. Otherwise, I'm going to get struck out. But it was this general change in the way the world was going. The Trump election thing, did that factor in as well, I presume?
It did, yeah. And it wasn't, at least not at first, I wouldn't say it was, the C word in itself. It was the way it was like relentlessly marketed, the way people who had, in my opinion, very legitimate concerns about the vax, and those people were demonized from the start very heavily, people losing their jobs. And that was, it just like reeked of something like very extremely suspicious. And I think a lot of those concerns for me and other people have come to bear fruit, unfortunately.
Were you writing at this stage, or is writing something that sprang from this realization that the world wasn't exactly as you'd perceived it, and a sort of deep desire to vent your frustration, or at least find an outlet for the rage maybe you were feeling at seeing this going on around you?
I wouldn't say my relatively recent writing activity was born out of this sentiment. I've been writing short stories since I was in, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade, and it's ebbed and flowed, and I hadn't written a whole lot, more or less fell off until about 2 or 3 years ago, when I started writing The Fall. That was probably the first, like the largest work I'd ever attempted at the time. I was still an undergrad in college. But yeah, I would say those things are just kind of coincidental, becoming increasingly red-pilled and getting back into writing. I would say they definitely influence each other now, but I wouldn't say that I started writing like purely because of it.
The Fall, the book we're about to discuss, is not particularly political in any sense, but that makes sense from what you say. You had basically started it, and it's not a long book, so I imagine you were well through it before you even became red-pilled to an extent.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I say it's not political. It does delve into issues of strength, physical strength and well-being, and faith, organized religion, innocence and naivety, and the forces that are out there that fight these things. And we'll come to that in a little bit. So the writing was, now you were at college for a while, and you were becoming going from the warrior caste into a more intellectual state of mind, and this is where it came from, really, that the writing bug, if you want to call it that. It was a college experience that was pushing you in that direction, would you say?
I'm not even sure I would say that, because my degree is actually in mathematics, so it couldn't be more different from anything creative. Although obviously there can be, you could say there's a degree of creativity in advanced mathematics, but that's a whole other conversation. But no, totally disparate. It's that this story primarily came from like its inspiration, which I found, and we can get into, and I just sat on for several years and just thought about from time to time, because I have moleskins everywhere that are just filled with like 1 to 3 sentence ideas or prompts, things that I see, and I just write it down and I chew on it sometimes for years like this, and eventually I decided to do something about it and make a story out of it.
That's amazing. I also have a box, like a shoebox, full of small notebooks collected maybe over 15 years, which were the embryonic ideas and thoughts that went into eventually writing. Started when I was a late teenager, and I got so many of them that I felt that it would be a shame not to somehow capitalize on the fact that I'd done all this hard work and put it together in something. So you're the first other person I've heard who's used that technique. So you're a mathematician. That's beginning to make sense now. So Kurt Gödel, can you explain the avatar on your Twitter account, which is where I found you?
Yeah, so Gödel is most known for developing the theories of incompleteness. And there's a lot going on with them, but fundamentally they say that within a set, or you could even say in the literary sense, in a universe, in a place in which you're operating, there will be facts, true things, capital T, true things about that set of things or that universe that cannot be proven with the rules and the laws of that place or universe. So in the strictly mathematical sense, that just means that there will be, at the foundation of mathematics, there will be things that are true but can't be proven with the tools that we have in mathematics. So and there's a lot of different interpretations of this. Some of them are religious. Mine is in a similar kind of sense, which is kind of like a statement on faith, like being like very compelled about something and believing it to be capital T true, but not having any way to prove it because its truthfulness lies outside of the extent to which we can reach and touch. So that's why it kind of compels me, I guess.
Right. Well, it makes sense, and it ties in with the novel in that sense. While we're on the subject of your avatars and stuff, Based Fyodor, where does that come from? That's your handle, based_Fyodor on Twitter. Is that Fyodor Dostoevsky, who's the only one I know of? Or
yes,
it is, and that's because you find his writing inspirational, or?
Yeah. So that's the base Fyodor was like a passing joke from another Twitter friend of mine who was just kind of like in passing called me that in the group chat, and I was like, that's pretty catchy. I'll change it. I like that. But yeah, Dostoevsky is my favorite Russian writer, and I had to read the first work of his that I ever read was Notes from Underground, that I had to read for a lit class in college, which was a very difficult class. And I had to write extensively about Notes from Underground. And I would walk around my neighborhood reading it because I couldn't focus in my house because it's Russian literature and the dogs are loud. So I would just walk the streets of my neighborhood reading this book. And it was, I just feel like every page I was reading something that was just absolutely kicking me in the pants. That was just, it resonated with me so much that even though I had never heard anyone say it before, and it was just the strangest thing. It was like kind of revelatory. So I think about Notes from Underground a lot and Dostoevsky a lot in general, and I just kind of wanted to pay homage to that a little bit.
Super. Any other writers, past, present, that have inspired you or guided you or given you ideas on style and plot?
There's a handful. There's a lot of stuff that's I've been reading lately that I really enjoy. I didn't expect to enjoy. That doesn't necessarily influence my writing, but I enjoy it a lot, and it gives me things to think about in terms of, rather than just reading things that I want to imitate or be similar to. Most of which have been Twitter writers like Caleb Caudell. I recently read his novel, which I thought was absolutely astounding for a first novel. And I told him that ad nauseum. There have been a few other people. I read T.R. Hudson's, of course, which I really enjoyed. Thought it was absolutely fantastic first novel.
Yeah.
But as far as inspiration goes and trying to develop a personal voice and style, I would say, at least as far as The Fall goes, 95 to 99% of that comes from a Southern Gothic writer named Harry Crews. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I knew you were going to focus in on Southern Gothic to some extent. It's not an area I'm familiar with. I presume Faulkner falls into that category, but you don't even know much about him. Tell us about Crews then, please.
Yeah, so Faulkner is, you could probably say, is the father of Southern Gothic, and I would say Flannery O'Connor is probably the queen of Southern Gothic, both of which I look up to tremendously. Harry Crews had a very similar life trajectory to me, and he was also coincidentally a family friend. He grew up in extremely rural Georgia. He joined the Marine Corps. He got out and used his GI Bill to go to school and started writing, and found some success writing a lot of novels. I think he's wrote 12 to 15 novels, and also went on to do like kind of gonzo journalism in a similar vein to like Hunter S. Thompson for Playboy and a couple other like larger publications. Had a few documentaries made about him, which are all very interesting to watch. And his writing, as far as The Fall goes, largely comes from or is inspired by his work, which I would say is his best, in my opinion. It's called A Feast of Snakes, which centers on a rattlesnake festival in rural Georgia. And I don't want to ruin it, but the climax of which is just as dramatic and dark as the one in my novella.
In The Fall, yeah.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time, probably in retrospect, too much time dissecting that novel. I would rewrite just random pages in the novel. I would have the book open in front of me, and I would type out the novel just to try and get a feel for flow, or like some type of like linguistic rhythm, or like maybe try and glean some information. Sorry, I have to steal my dog's phone because it's incredibly loud. Try and pull, like wring a little more juice out of what he was doing and how he got there. Maybe. Yeah. I wrote like really thorough outlines of the book. How long is the book? Like in its universe from beginning to end, is it days or a week or what? How long is each scene last? To what degree are we spending, like what kind of narration is it? To what degree are we spending time in people's heads? How deep do we get in them? Like everything you could possibly think of. Like I filled probably half a moleskin of just trying to dissect that novel in an attempt to kind of pay it homage, but more to give myself like a jumping off point, like trying to imitate someone until I can find a voice of my own that I feel comfortable and confident with.
To any new writers out there watching this, take heed. JL's giving you some very good clues as to how to start if you're not sure how to start. That's another tactic and technique I used. I used the Ian Fleming novels of James Bond in exactly the same way, breaking them down into their raw raw ingredients and sort of reconcocting them in my head until I got a feel for what he was doing. And that other advice that you gave about keeping notebooks is invaluable in my mind. There's so many things that go through your head as you're going through life that won't stay there for long, I can assure you. And the best thing, if they're any good, or even if they're not, just write them down. Then you've got a reference point for later on when you do have to provide the reader with some kind of interesting facts and thoughts and so on. You've got something to draw on rather than just what happens to be in your brain at that moment, which often enough isn't sufficient. Very interesting. Right, we come on to the novelette. Well, it's a short, even for a novella, I think you'll admit. It's a sort of very long story, short story, but we'll classify it as a novella in this context. It's very readable, and it features a traveling preacher called Henry Johnson, who is unique, if you like, in that he performs workouts using weights in the churches, and as well as praying at the same time. And in this he becomes very successful, and it's sort of, we catch up with him just at this moment where he's about to become quite the famous preacher, set in Florida. Can we recapitulate? Where did the concept come from? I know you talked about the Harry cruise, but it's quite a unique niche you found with this sort of idea of a modern day preacher that lifts weights. Where does that come from?
So I don't remember exactly. Because this inspiration came to me almost a decade ago. But I was walking into a restaurant, and in the Deep South, it's very common to see advertisements for what are called tent revivals. Are you familiar with what those are?
Vaguely,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really just church being held outside under a big tent, and it's usually pretty lively. It's usually kind of fundamentalist or Pentecostal, like the people who do a lot of like shouting and speaking in tongues and this type of stuff. Usually what people think of when they think of religion in the Deep South, I guess, for better or worse. I was walking into a diner and there was an advertisement for one on the door. And I was like, that's interesting. Can't remember the last time I saw one of those. This was in North Carolina at the time, like on the North Carolina coast. And I was like, that would be interesting, but how could it be more interesting? What if he did something crazy? What's the strangest thing you could do with the word of God? Maybe lift weights. Maybe do a really heavy deadlift. And I just chuckled to myself and I wrote it down. And a couple years later, I was like, let's put it on paper and see what happens. If it's dumb, it's dumb. But we're never gonna know until a couple thousand words in.
You yourself, I take it, lift weights and work out, because it's very well written, the scenes where he does that. That's all.
I did to a large degree when I was in the military, because I had the time to do so. With my current job, which I took, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, I travel, so it's difficult to do.
Right.
But before I did that, yes, I was very into weightlifting.
Well, I'm going to read the opening paragraphs from the novella to give the audience a flavour for what your quality of your writing and the style. Every inch of Henry Johnson's 6-foot body was taut and quivering. Every muscle could be seen jumping with the word of God. With every sentence, more and more blood was flowing through his miraculous limbs until his entire body was a veiny roadmap to heaven. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. He knows everything. He will give us the strength and to persevere through any answer. One must only bow down to him and his mercy, and he will lift us up. What was broken, he will make new. What was weak, he will make strong. What was uncertain, our Lord will make clear as day. Jesus is the only strength one will ever need. And there we go. Within a few sentences, you've got us right into something that's quite interesting, that probably is overlooked by most, but faith and physical strength, they do seem, the modern day church, there's no connection whatsoever, but if you step back a bit and look at faith and physical strength, they seem to be parallel and complementary to one another. Is that something you were trying to illustrate?
Not really. When I go back and read that, I not to pat myself on the back too much, but when I read that intro, it still stuns me a little bit because I think it's so good. It might be the best part of the novel. I don't know.
It's very good.
But it just kind of came to me, his sermonizing. I mean, I don't regularly attend church now, but I grew up Southern Baptist, so I guess there was just enough still bouncing around in my skull that it just kind of came out, and I was like, oh my God. But no, that wasn't really my intention. It just seemed like something Henry would say. He's a huge dude, and he's going to try to relate the physicality to the religious or the spiritual facet of his life, and I don't know, he makes it pretty compelling.
The British, a century or more ago in the 1800s, made a big thing of Christianity, religion, and physical strength going together. There was even, I can't remember the term they gave to it, but it was very much the two were part of each other, if you see what I mean. Obviously, it's something that's, if you look at the modern day church, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody with physical strength or mental strength for that matter. But it was certainly a thing, and obviously it makes sense that it should be. So will you give us now a little sort of précis of how, where we're at in the novel? We've got this preacher, Henry, in your own words, without giving away the surprises. How does the plot develop?
So Henry is coming into his own as a traveling preacher with his own very particular style that people find compelling just because he's a physical oddity. Which is another thing that I pulled from Harry Crews. His novels almost always center on physically abnormal people or people that are disfigured, birth defects, things like that, wildly obese people, etc. He's unsurprisingly catching the eye of the cute local girl who works at the bank, and he is. I guess I kind of left it up to interpretation as to whether he is like singularly focused on being devout and religious, or if he's just sexually naive, and he's been so sheltered his whole life, and his life has had a single focus such that he doesn't even think about women in this way, or if he does, it's like in a familial sense, or it's like a very platonic. I kind of made that purposely vague. And he encounters this woman who attends one of his sermons, and she is also very attractive, and he doesn't think much of it. She asks to see where he works out, and he finds this kind of strange because he lives like a monk. His house is nothing to speak of, and neither is his gym, which is just his garage. And it's dirty and musty, and not much to it. And this woman ends up having not the best intentions as far as what Henry's personal truth is, as far as how he is so unbelievably muscular and strong. And she kind of betrays him and seduces him and betrays him in a sense. And this comes out in the middle of a sermon, and things unfold and spiral downward extremely quickly.
I know it's set in the modern world. You give enough. It's not very detailed, the clues, but there are enough clues that there's pickup trucks and stuff. But in my mind, for some reason, it's a black and white film, and it stars Burt Lancaster. Sorry, not Burt Reynolds. Burt Lancaster as the preacher, and it's all set in about between the 30s and the 50s, if that makes sense. It has that kind of a feel to it. I guess because of the innocence as well. You don't find many innocent 25-year-olds anymore in that part of America, whereas you might have done half a century ago. Was there any concept in your mind about this being something, a story from the past dragged into the future or into the present?
Not really. That wasn't particularly intentional. I particularly made it um, kind of ahistorical because I kind of just personally, my personal preference, I find it kind of annoying and distracting when stories age themselves too much and make it so that they don't age as well. In my opinion, I prefer, in my mind, the best stories are timeless ones.
Right.
Um, like A Good Man is hard to find. That could take place in 1920. That could take place in 2020, in my opinion, just because it is what it needs to be. There's no talk of cell phones or technology. They're not germane to the story. The story doesn't need them, so why put them? So that was kind of my intention to make it so that it could be almost anywhere at any time. But it was less so about the story that I had in my mind was not in any particular era. It was just me trying to make it kind of ahistorical as possible.
Very good. I'm going to read another excerpt from the early part of the book, and it's to illustrate, again, the quality of your writing, and it's to do with the weightlifting part. Henry bent over and took hold of the bar with opposing grips just outside of his knees. He dropped his waist and, with perfect form, began lifting 645 pounds. The bar didn't rise quickly, but it never stopped either. Henry knew what he was doing. He had done it 1,000 times alone and 1,000 times more in front of people. He never felt closer to God than when he was moving weight, and he did it every chance he could. Throughout the entire movement, Henry held the gaze of an elderly woman in the middle of the crowd. Her hands lifted to the air in exultation. Nothing could be heard but the light clanking of weights against each other. When Henry locked out, the first to break the silence was the old woman, who let out a feeble, "Praise Jesus." The rest of the congregation erupted into applause. Henry held it there, his face the same dark purple as the robes draped across the wooden cross behind him. He smiled at the crowd and slowly began lowering it. The weights tapped the floor, and Henry was going back for a second repetition. The crowd began chanting his name. At the top of the second repetition, Henry's hands were on fire and his lower back was giving out. "Please, Lord. Please, just one more, Lord, for my people. Please, just one more," he whispered, the words under his breath as he went down for the third time. The crowd flooded the stage and surrounded him. His shins bled and soaked through his pants. At his knees, the weights almost overcame him. By mid-thigh, his vision was dimming, and he could feel his calluses tearing. They formed little puddles of blood, which made the congregation gasp and step back. They grew silent again, staring at the St. John's River worth of blood in his bulging veins. Lockout came, and he lowered the bar to the floor. Henry fell to his knees and croaked, "Praise Jesus." The crowd repeated it several times, louder than ever. Well, you've definitely got the writing skills, and that's some terrific example of it. What's coming next in JL Mackey's writing career? What are you planning? Any advances along the road in any way, and so on?
I have a few things in the pipe right now, one of which primarily is the novel that I'm working on, which is also, I would say, Southern Gothic as well, but not quite as dark and dramatic as that. I felt like I maybe needed to tone it down a little bit, lest it be fantastical beyond belief, even though I do enjoy writing stuff like that. That has been extremely slow going, again, because of work, traveling all the time. It's hard to find time. I really just have to write when I have a few minutes, whether it's on my computer in the hotel room or on my phone at work. I'll do what I have to do. So that's very slow going right now.
Can you tell us a bit? Can you tell us a bit about the novel, other than the
Sure.
American Gothic angle, Southern Gothic?
It centers on a I haven't nailed down his age, but he's probably 25 to 35-year-old I call him a cowboy. He doesn't actively work as one. His family owns a cattle ranch, and his whole life he wanted to grow up and work on this cattle ranch, take the cattle ranch over. Um, but he was diagnosed with a very severe rheumatoid arthritis as a child, and as he grew up, it became so severe that he was pretty severely or not mentally, physically disabled, to the point where he has like swollen joints and extreme pain, and it has difficulty walking and just generally getting around. And this, affects his psyche in ways you might expect. He falls out of favor with his father, and he no longer plays a part in the family business. He gets into drugs and alcoholism and things like that, and he doesn't have a good relationship with a lot of people, just because he's distant and he's always in pain, and he's kind of an addict.
Wow, it sounds
And
quite a negative, long series of negatives there happening. It's going to be quite a profound, in that sense, novel, deep in the suffering and so on. Or does it turn around in some way?
well, it will turn around when he has the opportunity to make a very large sacrifice, um, which will be a totally thankless one. But I find a lot of interest in characters that just absolutely lose their minds, as with like in A Feast of Snakes, the main character, JL Mackey, just picks up a shotgun in the middle of a crowd and just starts blasting people. But I always feel like
that's the name you've chosen as yours. Okay.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. But I feel like I frequently see when I come across characters that are losing their minds, I don't find the backstory as to why they're losing their minds especially compelling. I feel like it has to be one thing after another, and their downward spiral has to be very believable. Otherwise, it's just kind of a person who was crazy to begin with, and rather than someone devolving into like inner chaos. So I wanted to absolutely have like this really really rough backstory to make it as believable as possible, that this person is just completely emotionally out of touch with other people and the world in general, doesn't fit in anywhere any kind of way, and is just standing on the edge of a razor blade, and we're just waiting to find out which way he falls.
Okay. Is Harry Cruz still alive? Or no?
No, he died in, I believe, 2012, 2013.
Okay. So to clarify, you took your name, your nom de plume, from that character in that book, the guy that blasts away with the shotgun. Okay. Very good.
Yes.
So that's the novel you're working on. Any time scale on that before you finish it?
I'm a really bad procrastinator. That's probably why I plan so much, just because it's a good excuse to not actually write. I'll just write about writing, and that's a lot easier. I would like to finish it within the next year. Right now I have about 10,000 words, not a lot. I still have to figure out the middle and ending, the finer points, before I can like really chug away and cut at large chunks. So it's slowly but surely kind of thing. And beyond that, I don't know. I sometimes get a wild hair, and I like to write stuff like the story that I wrote a couple weeks ago called A Nice Saturday. I've always wanted to write about crazy stuff at flea markets, because I go to them all the time, and they're interesting. So that crops up sometimes, but that's like something that takes a few days to write. It doesn't really take a lot of time or like mental energy away. And beyond that, I have a longer term project that I'm right now collecting material for, which is all just short stories or flash fiction that's based on the conversations that I overhear in public. which some of which can be like really funny or dark or surprising. And I wanted to make a collection of short stories based on those conversations, what kind of ideas they inspire. But between those two, not really a whole lot. I'm trying to get more focused lately, and it's not always so successful.
No, I understand. Life gets in the way. It's very difficult as a writer, especially these days with social bloody media and things like Twitter. You've started a Substack, I see, and will you be publishing for people who are interested? Continue to be publishing sort of excerpts and reviews and so on there?
I will, yeah. I certainly intend to. I'll probably, at a certain point, I'll probably publish a novel in its entirety on there for free, and just maybe one chapter at a time or something like that. But yeah, I enjoy writing the reviews. That's something I don't do a lot of, and I'm not very good at. So it's an interesting thing, an interesting way to think about other people's work critically, and maybe use that somehow to think about my own work. But yeah, I'd like to continue to like semi-regularly contribute to it as the inspiration arises.
I've noticed, really, it's a very recent phenomenon. It's almost in the last 6 weeks or so. Quite a lot of our writers in our circuit of the Twitterati who are red-pilled or non-woke or whatever have started Substacks. I've also noticed there's a lot of cross reviewing going on, which is great. Suddenly, your book only came out a few months ago, and it's already sort of being seen and reviewed and talked about because of this new network that's emerged. It's a recent thing. A year ago, it wasn't really there. Have you noticed this as well, that there's a sort of an emerging, I don't know what to call it, a network, for want of a better word, of like-minded writers and critics supporting each other?
I can't really speak a whole lot to its development because I've really only been participating in literature Twitter within the last few months. Before that, most of my followers came from an entirely separate, unrelated kind of Twitter community. But it's certainly something I appreciate, and I'm really thankful for the general, like, we're all gonna make it kind of sentiment in literature Twitter. Everyone is extremely wholesome, extremely helpful. I had several people volunteer to proofread the fall and give me feedback and stuff like that. So is everyone sharing the love, and I think it's a really great thing. And I think it's something that probably has to happen for like a dissident or right wing or any kind of like really new niche literature community to thrive and bootstrap itself. Is people have to help each other as much as they can and kind of get it rolling. So yeah, I think it's great, and I think that's what it will take for the community to continue to grow.
Very well put. To paraphrase your lead character, amen. I think that's a lovely note to finish on. Anybody else out there that's watching and wants to contribute, connect on Twitter is the easiest way, I think. But yeah, this is what we need. This is the whole point of this show as well. It's a chance to showcase, support them, and generally form a network, however slowly and however incrementally, but form one all the same that gives the whole thing some kind of structure, because we're completely lacking the benefit of having supportive publishing houses, agents, and the media, and just about anything else that would normally promote and support newcomers into a genre. Well, JL, I much appreciate you coming on. I think that's a terrific chat. We've learned a lot, and there's a lot of advice there for new writers, which I hope they will take heed of. And in a year or so, when you get to the end of the next book, I would be more than delighted to read it and hopefully get you back on the show.
Thank you. That would be a lot of fun. This has been a lot of fun.
Great. Well, I appreciate it very much. I'll be in touch in due course. Thanks a lot.